Joining us now, Congressman, 4th District, Republican, my congressman, that's always a good thing, Randy Forbes. Congressman, good to have you, sir.
John, it's always good to be with you. I hope you're doing good and your family's all doing well.
Right, and if they are, thanks for asking. And if you or your bride need a security system, call Sentry Security Systems, Robert and Brenda Ike at 800-635-SAFE, right? How easy is that?
Yeah, I tell you, that's pretty good. And in today's world, everybody needs security, don't they?
Absolutely. Now, speaking of security, Congressman, I don't even know where to start. So President Obama decides to send 50 special ops Americans to fight in Syria. We can't really figure out what the mission is, nor can we figure out what 50 people are going to do. Can you help us understand what the plan is here?
Unfortunately, John, I can't because I'm not sure what the plan is. One of the things that we have had with this administration from day one is the lack of any kind of strategic plan. What they do is simply react to situations, but the result of that, John, is you can spin the globe in your office, and anywhere it stops and you put your finger on, you will see how our foreign policy is not just a failure now, but it's an abysmal failure all over the globe. And this is not just in Syria. I mean, we just had a situation where the Chinese are getting more and more aggressive with these artificial land formations that they're doing. They're literally going into the South China Sea and other areas and building areas so that they can put runways and other things, and then just out of the air claiming it as their property. And they are telling other countries, you can't come within 12 miles of these sites. Our Pentagon and our military people felt we should be sailing our ships through there to show we don't accept this claim. But the administration, through their National Security Council, Ms. Rice, just prohibited from doing that. And not any strategy, just because they say no. Well, the same thing in Syria. You've got a president that draws a red line, they cross it, he does nothing, but then all of a sudden he comes back, he's going to send 50 people. That's not a plan, John, and so we're going to be trying with the Armed Services Committee over the next several weeks to formulate this plan and find out what it is. But I can tell you, it's like most of what they've had around the globe. It's not a plan; it's just a reaction.
Now, Congressman, you're a key member of the House Armed Services Committee. You're very involved with what's going on. You also get intelligence classified briefings that you're unable to share that we don't have. So you've got the knowledge of what's going on here. But we're sending, the president just sent troops to fight Boko Haram. Now he's sending 50 people, we can't figure this out, into Syria. Plus we got another 3,500 that went into Iraq that he called advisors, but they're getting combat pay, right? Yet we have no authorization of war. We have no AUMF. He's not come to Congress and outlined his plan. And a lot of people wondering, are we going to get involved in another entanglement? I think Americans go with you, Congressman, if there's a clear mission. I don't think in any of these instances we have one.
Well, there's worse. It's worse than that, John. You're exactly right. They get not just frustrated, but irate when they see us going into any kind of conflict and we don't have a clear strategic plan that we can articulate. Now, you're right, some of the stuff is classified in the tactical area, but we ought to be able to come out strategically and say, this is what our goal is, this is what the mission is, and this is why we have to do it. And this administration does not do that. But I think one thing that's even more concerning to me from those same briefings that you're talking about is the lack of resourcing that this president is doing for these missions. And so everything, when you're looking at military, is about the degree of risk that our men and women have to take. And when you go into something and you have 1 foot in and 1 foot out, and that's not an accusation I'm making, that's an accusation that his own secretaries of defense, at least 3 of them that he's appointed, have said, that he doesn't have his heart in these operations. John, it puts our men and women at risk because It's a big difference of sending in fewer people than you really need to do the job and not authorizing them to do the job, that puts their lives at risk. And then the other thing is, and I'll tell you, this is reverberated with our allies and with our enemies. When you have a president that comes in and he says, we're going to be strong around the world, and you look at all the threats around the world, and for the first time that I know of, for not anything related to the defense bill itself, he comes in and vetoes the very bill, a bipartisan bill that passed overwhelmingly in the House and Senate, and he vetoes the very bill that authorizes his military. John, the symbolic effect of that, much less the resourcing effect, is enormous with our allies and our enemies around the world. And this is the first president that I know that took his own military hostage to try to get what he wanted in other areas of the budget. And that's just a travesty.
Is it possible for this veto to be overridden?
For the veto on the National Defense Bill?
Yes.
What I think will happen is now, since he ultimately got what he wanted on this budget deal, I'm suspecting, John, that what will happen is that we will make some modifications in the defense bill, and he will probably go ahead and sign it into law. Or I think it probably will. The veto will be overridden because this is just so egregious. I mean, just looking on a couple of areas. I mean, with this veto, we lost 3 destroyers. We lost 2 attack submarines. We lost and delayed the Air Force bomber and Striker. These are all resources that they vitally needed, John, and that was all because of a veto to get what he wanted for the IRS, EPA, and some of these other agencies. It's just unconscionable.
So what you're saying, Congressman, is basically Barack Obama, you said, held the entire defense apparatus of the United States hostage to get the domestic spending that he was after, right?
There's no question. There's no question that's what he did.
So you look at what got passed Friday night at 3 a.m. in the middle of the night. I just had Congressman Rob Whitman on, your colleague from Virginia, and we were like, okay, you passed this in the middle of the night, 3 a.m., like a banana republic does. You got $40 million in increased spending for defense, $40 million in increased spending for domestic, but you didn't really address sequestration. You didn't really address any of the needs of the military, really, at the end of the day, and yet you pass this thing in the middle of the night. How can you explain it all?
Well, first of all, Rob's a wonderful guy, and as you know, he voted against that budget deal,
yes,
as did I. So we did not feel, in fact, I think 2/3 or more of the Republicans in the House voted against this deal. One of the things that I would say is, look, I don't get to make the calls on when they vote on them, and they didn't do that in the House. That was in the Senate where they did the late vote. Ours was in the middle of the day. And look, we're big boys. We'll do the work we need to do. My staff will stay up 24 hours if they need to do the analysis. But the problem is, once you've done the analysis, they add money in certain line items, but they take it out in other line items for the military. And so the overall impact of this, John, was not an increase in the budget that we had. It was actually a decrease in what the defense bill had for national defense by $5 billion. Well, this is $5 billion below what the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said was the minimum amount that he could go to still stay on the ragged edge of being able to do what he needs to do. And they still cut $5 billion out of that. I think that's a horrible direction to go. It's huge for us in Virginia and Hampton Roads because you look at the job layoffs and all that we have had because of shipbuilding and what this administration is done in certain areas and taking ships out of this area. But the other big thing on this, John, and I'm sure Rob pointed this out to you, this budget bill did not just increase the debt ceiling. It did away with the debt ceiling for the rest of this president's term in office because it suspended it. It didn't just raise the amount. It just basically suspended it. That means you've essentially given this president a blank check. This is to a president who not only has shown that he will use that blank check, but he'll use it recklessly. And that's why many of us just couldn't go along with this deal.
Congressman, how do you give Barack Obama a blank spending check, bust the budget caps, release him from those requirements, when you've got a majority in the House and a majority in the Senate, you control the two houses, you increased your majority in the House in the midterms. People look at this, Congressman, and they just can't understand why Barack Obama was able to win everything when Republicans control the Senate and the House. How did this happen?
Well, I think when they say control, you have Republican members who are in a majority in the House and the Senate, and you have two big things going, John, that a lot of people don't recognize unless you study it, unless you're in there. And the first one is this. Just because you have a majority of people with R's by their name doesn't mean that they all agree on the same thing, just like a majority of people with D's wouldn't all agree on the same thing. And so what you have to do is find 218 people who are willing to say, no, we just think this is so egregious, we're going to try to stop this. Now remember, you've got to get that 218 in the House, but then in the Senate, it's not just a majority. You've got these 60 people as long as they have this cloture rule. And then the second thing that's important to remember is that even when you can stop many of these things, we passed a national defense bill. It was passed by those overwhelming majorities of Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate. But the president then can veto it, and then you have to have these supermajorities to get that passed and to override that veto. And you don't have enough numbers to override the veto. So that's one of the huge things. That's not a Republican or Democratic problem. That's a constitutional problem. That's the way it was written in the law. So what we have got to do is, and Paul Ryan mentioned this all weekend, we have got to be bolder in the approaches that we take and be willing to stand for those principles. No question about that. Number two, we've got to continue to put legislation out there and make the president veto it, even though he can veto it, and probably some of those will not be overridden. Third thing is that I think it's time to get rid of the 60-vote cloture rule in the Senate so that you can get some of this stuff passed to stop some of the spending. And then the final thing that I'll just say, John, is, the clock is running out on some of this. We don't have decades and decades and decades to turn this around, and that's why this presidential race is going to be so vital coming up, whoever the candidate might be. That we are able to put somebody in the presidency, because I think the public is realizing now the incredible power that the presidency has in this country, and why it's important that we have somebody in there that will obey the law, that will stay within the framework of the Constitution, and that will build up our national defense and also bring some fiscal sanity back to the entire budgeting process. 2016
might be the final hope for America. Some people are saying that, and I'm coming around to that conclusion. I got a couple more minutes. Congressman Randy Forbes with us, Republican District 4. Congressman Forbes sits on the influential House Judiciary Committee and the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman, the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal, I got to be honest with you, every time something on this leaks out, it looks more frightening to the average American worker. Now we've got Malaysia coming in, Indonesia coming in. Congressman, the average wage in Indonesia is $2.50 a day. These workers are going to be coming into the United States if this thing goes down. How do you stand on this now?
Well, first of all, understand that there are two different things. There's one, do we have the authority to even do these trade deals? And I believe very strongly that we should at least have the authority to do them. But secondly, and this is what you're really talking about, is what the trade deals look like and how the trade deals should be crafted. Now, the reason the trade deals are important, and it's important to get them right, is because, John, whether we like it or not, 2/3 of all the trade in the world is probably going to be going through the Asia-Pacific area in the next 10 years. We do not want American businesses not to be able to compete in that area. Everybody always focuses on them coming in and competing in the United States. But 2/3 of this trade over the next decade is going to come through that Asia-Pacific area. That's enormously big. We are going to have an enormous market in that area that the United States shouldn't and can't just afford to write off. That's one. Number two is, if I talk to our allies around that region, The number one important thing to them for national security is making sure we have some sort of trade agreements with these countries, because if we don't, China will come in and have those agreements, and then they'll lead to military agreements, and that's going to be hugely detrimental for us. But what you're talking about, John, is the importance of making sure we have good deals. And that's why two things need to be done. One, we need to have transparency and let the public know what these deals are so that they can weigh in on them and see them. And then the second thing is we need to make sure that the American businessmen have level playing fields. Because I don't care what country you pick around the world, it isn't just about their cheap labor that competes with us. Our business people on a fair and level playing field can beat anybody in the world. They are the best in the world at producing and doing what they do. What hurts them far worse than is when we put them on an unlevel playing field by writing bad agreements, or secondly, we kill them here by putting too many taxes on them, too many regulations on them, and too much litigation on them, so they can't possibly compete in the first place. So I think the important thing is for us to make sure we have a deal that's a fair deal, level playing field deal, but then to focus back at home and say, how do we get some of these burdens off of our business people so that they're not hampered coming out of the starting gate, and they actually have a chance to do what they do better than anybody in the world, and that's compete and produce.
Okay, Congressman, we're out of time. I've got to tell you, I don't like this Trans-Pacific Partnership deal. I hear what you're saying, but when we're talking about losing more jobs for more American workers, it's very troubling to me. But we are out of time. We want to thank Randy Forbes for being with us. More info, go to forbes.house.gov. Congressman, it's always an honor to have you on, sir. Thank you so much.
John, thank you. Great to be with you.